Hey everyone, welcome to today's video. Before we get started, I just ask that if you would like for me to read your very own scary stories, email me down in the description below. As always, enjoy these true scary stories. I saw a building that only exists at night. Honestly, I didn't think it was real. It was only when I saw it again that I was completely certain. I was a passenger on one of those buses that keep running even after late at night. And if my word still holds any value after what I'm about to relate, then let me tell you, those late night buses are more crowded than you can imagine. Sitting alone in the corner by the window, I clutched my backpack every time someone crossed the aisle. Not that I lacked confidence in the safety of public transportation during the early hours. It was that the night had its own charms, and it seemed to enjoy concealing people's features, making them even darker than they already appeared to be. I rested my head against the window and gazed outside. We passed empty streets and convenience stores about to close. Except for a few busy bars playing samba loudly that would continue all night, everything was quiet, and the city itself seemed ready to sleep. The small lined buildings merged with the shadows, forming a unique landscape, an uneven complex, as if designed by some mad architect, coexisting under the embrace of a dark blue sky. I stared at that sky as if searching for something hidden where there was nothing. Suddenly I was stunned when it was consumed by such darkness that, for a brief moment, I thought the world was ending. The darkness dissipated in the next instant, revealing the other end of that black monolith in my field of view. No, it was actually a building so tall and black that the darkness of the sky seemed to pale in comparison. It was as if the night had responded to my search for something different in that monotonous urban landscape. I searched my memory for any hint of such a building. Although I hadn't lived in the city for long, I knew it well enough to recognize its landmarks. However, this was completely new. I thought maybe it could be a government building or the headquarters of a foreign corporation. But, to be honest, it seemed too large for either of them. It didn't help that it was so far away and shrouded in shadows to the point that there were no external windows in sight, let alone any signage or logo identifying it. The bus veered and we entered a tunnel, sweeping away the entire landscape, including the building, from my line of sight. I got distracted, as it often happens, and didn't think about it until I arrived at my apartment. It was already past midnight when I finally got home. I didn't even take a shower or do anything. I just went straight to bed. I was exhausted, even though I shouldn't have felt that way. And that was the end of it. I only remembered the building the following week. Considering how I described it and the strong impression it left on me, you might wonder how I could forget it so quickly and for so long. To be honest, I don't have a good explanation. Aside from hyperbole, the situation was just a momentary oddity, with little room to persist in the mind of a tired and overloaded college student. So the week passed, and following my daily routine and taking the same route home almost every night, one day I found myself gazing at an empty spot in the sky, and suddenly I remembered the building. And as if anticipating my recollection, it appeared again. I stared long enough to confirm that it was truly colossal, making all the other visible buildings in the area appear minuscule by comparison. I had the courage to look away to check if anyone, another passenger on the bus, was also seeing it, but the few people present were paying no attention. Strange, it was all very strange. Given the route that the bus took, I knew that the building must be somewhere near the city center. Perhaps close to the cafe where I worked. I made a mental note to check when I went to work the next morning, and to my surprise, this time I didn't forget. I took my lunch break to explore the city center. I cycled a few blocks and was sure it would be easier to find a massive building in the middle of the city, but there was no sign of it. Something whispers my name in the woods. It used to happen now and again. I first remember hearing it when I was just a boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old. I'd been on a stroll through the woods with my mom and her boyfriend, cutting through the park to get to an ice cream shop on the other side of town. "Freddie," the voice said quietly like a whisper. At the time, I thought it was just my mom's boyfriend, now ex, playing a prank on me. "What?" I asked him. He shrugged, didn't say anything. The second time it happened, I was 10 years old. My school wasn't far from the forest, and occasionally we'd do our physical education classes out there. This particular time, we were playing Capture the Flag. I was the flag keeper and exhausted from running, so I found a small spot away from the action to catch my breath. The flag was stuck into my belt on my waist, so I couldn't just grab a breath anywhere. It was easy to steal if somebody was quick or quiet enough. It just so happened one kid, Ryan, thought he was that quiet. Honestly, I wouldn't have heard him either. He was nearly on top of me. "Freddie!" I jumped at the sound of my name and Ryan lunged for my flag. Before he could reach me though, I bolted. At the time I thought that maybe Ryan called my name to rub in his impending victory. Like a "aha, Freddie, got ya" sort of thing. As time wore on, I learned that wasn't the case. The voice called out to me more frequently. When I was in high school, I got a job at a movie theater on the other end of town. The quickest route to get there was, you guessed it, to cut through the forest path. I walked it alone and often. The more I did, the more the voice would whisper my name. Soon it was whispering my name at least once every time I walked through the woods. "Freddie," it would say, and I'd stop and look around. When I wouldn't see anybody, I'd turn and continue on my way. This might sound a little silly, but I sort of got used to it. I guess maybe I just didn't want to think I was losing my mind, so I never told anybody about it. Being the kid that heard voices wasn't exactly a badge of honor in high school. Plus, I liked to think that maybe I just had some kind of special connection with the woods. Like some spiritual hippie thing. I was 17 years old when the voice terrified me. I'd been leaving a late shift at the theater, one much later than I'd ever done before, and had an exam I still needed to study for the next morning. As much as I didn't want to cut through the woods after dark, I didn't have the money for a cab, and the buses had stopped running. So I went through the forest. I'd walked the path 1,000 times before. Why should tonight be any different? It was quiet at first. Only the wind and the swaying trees greeted my ears. Now and again, I would hear something moving in the brush, but it was always easy enough to dismiss as a squirrel or raccoon. After all, I was in their territory. They were probably surprised by me. My heart jumped at the sound of my name. "Freddie," the voice said. "Jesus," I snapped, not expecting it in the dark. I took a deep breath and told myself to relax. "It's just you," I mumbled to myself with a chuckle. I walked for a few more minutes when I picked up on the faint sound of footsteps behind me. Was somebody else taking the shortcut? I turned around, peering into the inky dark of the forest trail. While the moonlight was enough to make out the path directly ahead, it was tough to see much further than 10 or 15 feet. I pulled out my phone and turned on the light, casting it over the trail. Nothing, just wood chips and a stray candy wrapper. I pocketed my phone, pulled my jacket tighter around me, and continued on. This time I picked up my pace, moving at a fast walk. "Freddie," the voice said again, this time less airy and more forceful. I ignored it, continuing on my way. I just wanted to get the hell out of those woods. It's hard to explain, but I'm sure you've felt the same impulse now and again. The sensation that you aren't safe. I felt it in my gut. My body was telling me to leave as quickly as possible. The voice repeated my name, its tone shifting lower than higher. It sounded unhinged, like an out-of-tune instrument. I'd never heard it repeat my name so often in such a short span of time. "Freddie," it sang. "Freddie, Freddie, Freddie," I broke into a run. "Freddie!" It screamed, and footsteps thundered behind me. My mind went blank, my body acting on its own. I ran as hard and as fast I could. The voice screamed my name over and over again, its footsteps closing in on me. I shouted for help, my voice cracking. "Freddie!" It shrieked from right behind me. I pulled my phone out and frantically dialed 911. I wasn't sure any longer that I could outrun this thing. Whatever it was, I needed help, desperately. The phone beeped, and I heard somebody answer on the other end. 911, what is your emergency? Something grabbed my shoulder. I screamed and whipped my hand around, connecting with nothing but air, but managing to lose my phone in the process. "Leave me alone," I screamed, throwing everything I had into my sprint. My lungs felt like they were on fire, but I knew the alternative of stopping would be far worse. I heaved breath after painful breath. Tears streamed down my face, and my legs burned with exhaustion. I was gonna die. I knew it. Then I burst out of the woods. I didn't stop to catch my breath. I didn't stop to look behind me. I kept running, running until I reached the nearest neighborhood a couple blocks away. That night, I took the long way home, sticking to the best lit streets and only those lined with homes. The voice, whatever it was, didn't follow me beyond the tree line. I'm home now, breathless and still trying to calm down. My mom's not here. She's still at her late shift at the hospital, but I'll tell her everything when she gets back. In the meantime, I contacted the police, and they're searching the forest. I don't know what it was that was whispering my name for all these years, but I know one thing. I'm never going back into those woods again. There were bright flashes of red in the sky. It's as if someone was waving around a flare light from space, faint but noticeable. We all made UFO jokes and laughed as we nailed our tents into the ground. I knew for sure that there were 5 of us. We have all been friends since early middle school, and we're celebrating our high school graduation with this getaway camping trip. The flashes of red must have stopped randomly as we made conversation while fixing up our tents. Dave managed to put his tent together the fastest and told us he was going to find some branches for the fire. I remember how he had worked with me at the local gas station last year. We used to do the night shift together, and it had made working at a desolate gas station much more fun than it was supposed to be. There was also Eric in the corner, still reading his tent manual, fidgeting with his signature round glasses. I wasn't as close with Eric as I was with the others, but I still remember sitting with him in math class and copying his homework one time. Ava was also there talking with Sally, my cousin. Both had decided to team up and work on one tent at a time. I also have clear memories of them, hanging around at school in our usual places. In fact, I even knew Ava's younger brother as he used to beg to go with us wherever we went. I bring all this up because I'm sure that there were 5 of us, including me, and that I knew everyone in the group. So David went to get some branches as we pulled out some foldable chairs and set them up around the fire pit. I remember feeling uneasy as the sun set and darkness began to consume the forest. The shadows of trees elongated around us as the minutes ticked by. Eric went to get a flashlight from his bag while we wondered what was taking Dave so long. He appeared soon after, the harsh rustling sounds of the bushes signifying his return. We were all buried in our chairs at this point, covered by our jackets. The temperature had dropped quickly and a slight breeze was beginning to pick up. "Geez, you guys weren't even bothered to pull out a chair for me," Dave said as he arranged all the branches in the pit. We had set up 5 chairs around the fire. I tried to rationalize the situation, but no matter how hard I focused, my head felt like it was underwater. I had perfect clarity up until that moment, but when I tried to focus on why 5 chairs were occupied when Dave hadn't sat down yet, my head seemed to just stop working, as if something was reaching in and pulling out my thoughts. Instinctually, I felt even more uneasy now, and I had placed why. The whole forest had gone dead silent. I looked around at the faces of the others and could tell that they had felt the same. Eric was fidgeting with his fingers, trying to scan around the group and spot the extra person, but it was futile. We headed away from the fire pit towards the tents, but I kept my eyes glued on our group. "How many people are here?" I whispered to Dave as he looked around and realized that we had indeed only packed 5 chairs. In fact, every person had brought with them their own chair. They were heavy to carry and we wouldn't bring any extra needlessly. "There's 5, right?" "I mean, there's 5 chairs," Dave replied. His voice wavered as he spoke. "No, I just think maybe one of us forgot our chair," I said. My mind was struggling to address the issue head-on, and now sought to find rational excuses instead. I didn't quite feel in control of my thoughts. It felt like swimming in a dream, and if I tried to force myself to think about who the 6th person was, my head would begin to throb. "Yeah, that sounds about right, actually," Dave said, relaxing and heading back to the group. When we walked back to the fire pit and circle of chairs, 2 chairs were empty. One for me and one for Dave. Everything was adding up now, even though we all agreed it wasn't before. Sally suggested we were all probably tired after the long hike to get here and probably just needed some sleep. She could have been right. We were all sleep deprived from waking up very early today to make it on time. Ava brought out the drinks. The whole 6-pack was emptied. We all moved closer to the crackling fire for warmth as we took sips from our cans and reminisced on memories of last year. Ava was in the middle of telling us about that one time she was home alone with weird things happening in her house when I got these sudden chills despite the pleasant warmth of the fire. What felt cozy and safe moments ago felt wrong now, all because I realized that there was a crucial detail I missed. Who started the fire? I asked, completely interrupting Ava in the middle of her story and breaking everyone else's immersion. Everyone looked momentarily annoyed until they realized they had no answer. Once again, I scanned the faces staring back at me, all barely illuminated by the light from the fire, all familiar and pale from fear. "Wasn't it you, Dave?" Eric asked. Dave shook his head. "I think the person standing behind Jenny did it," Sally said, looking over at me. I whipped my head around so quickly it hurt. My heart was pounding in my ears. There was nothing behind me except for the encompassing darkness of the woods. Staring at those tall, dark trees behind me made me feel exposed. I felt like a lost bird in a vast field. "Wait, I don't know," Sally said. Her eyes had gone wide and she was shaking visibly. She continued to look around frantically as Ava moved over to her, placing her hands on her shoulders and trying to calm her down. "I think we should leave this place," Ava stuttered. "Yeah, something just doesn't feel right, but I can't put my finger on it," Dave said. "But it's so dark out in the forest now, we'd probably get lost if we leave now." Someone else said, "Yeah, I think we should stay the night and leave as soon as we can tomorrow." Eric agreed. I tried to protest, but realized Eric was right. The woods harbored an oppressive darkness within which navigation would be near impossible. "Let's not sleep in our separate tents just to be safe," Sally said. We all agreed. We only brought one-person tents with us, but we could squeeze two if we tried. That way no one would be alone at night. Following this conversation, we all got up and made our pairs. I went with Dave and Sally like always went with Ava. Eric kept complaining that he didn't have a pair, but we reassured him he did. He wouldn't accept it. I feel like at some point we all realized that there were only 5 of us, and suddenly we were all huddling up in the middle of the clearing. "Why do we keep thinking there are 6 of us here?" Eric asked. Sweat was dripping down his face despite the cold. We had nearly left him all alone on his own, under the assumption that there was another person. My stomach turned as I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to mentally recap everyone here. My head throbbed, but I kept pushing it. "There's me, Dave, Eric, Ava, Sally, and..." I was pointing at each of them as I said the name. I retched and emptied the contents of my stomach on the ground when I got past Sally. The left side of my head felt like there was a knife stuck in it. My vision was blurry. Dave held me up to stop me from collapsing, and we all wordlessly started to move towards the tents as someone put the fire out. Dave helped me into a tent, while the 4 outside discussed what to do. I could only focus on snippets of the conversation as the excruciating pain beating against my skull came and went in waves. Sally had the brilliant idea of arranging 3 tents together so their openings faced together at right angles in a sort of U shape, so we could sleep as close as possible and also limit the entrance to our tents. Dave was about to go to help as they worked outside, but I clutched his hand and asked him to stay with me. The tents took some time to arrange. I started to feel a bit better once everyone got settled into their tents. A quick head count confirmed there were 5 of us. Eric would have to sleep in his tent alone, but he was more comfortable with it since all the tents were very close now. Looking back now, I think he was just trying to put a brave face on for us. I regret that moment deeply, letting him sleep in his tent alone. He was always less integrated in our group and knew that none of us would pair with him. Just before going to bed, we all agreed to leave as soon as the sun rose in the morning. I remember taking one last look outside the tent into the forest before trying to fall asleep. The wind had picked up, and the tree branches were swaying gently. Beyond our clearing was just pure darkness. It felt like the trees were closing in on me. With the faint moonlight illuminating our clearing, I turned my head to look over at the 2 tents we had left out, and saw someone standing next to them. Despite the circumstances, sleep came quickly and easily. Ava's shrill scream woke me up in the middle of the night. Dave and I ripped our tent door open to find Sally and Ava looking into Eric's tent. We pushed them aside Eric's sleeping bag was rolled up. He was still inside it, his head in the center, face contorted in utter agony. The rest of his body rolled around it, with the blue fabric now dripping with dark blood. Dave zipped up the door of the tent. Ava was in shock. Her eyes had become glassy and unfocused. Sally was shaking her repeatedly, tears streaming down her face. Dave picked up his torch and yelled at us to get up and run. We left the campsite behind and entered the trail we had come from. The 5 of us huddled together, Dave leading in the front as he cast his weak flashlight over the path so we could see it. All we had to help us get through this 2-hour trail was a small white circle of light. Even the moon failed to illuminate our surroundings through the dense foliage. Ava tripped and fell, twisting her ankle. We came to a stop. Someone said they knew how to splint it, so we could keep going. They dragged her into the woods instead. It happened too quickly for any of us to process. Sally was about to run after Ava when Dave held her back. She struggled and managed to free herself, running into the trees to follow the echoes of Ava's screams. I was about to run after her, but Dave held me by the shoulders and shook me hard. "We need to get out of here, Jenny, please," he said. I hesitated but jolted into motion again when Sally's voice was cut off abruptly. She had been calling out Ava's name as she ran after her. Dave and I continued to run down the trail, trying to get to our car so we could get out of here. There was nothing we could do. At some point, there were 3 of us running on the trail, Dave and I shoulder to shoulder, while someone followed us closely behind. "Dave, who's behind us?" I gasped. My heart was threatening to burst through my rib cage, and my legs burned. He turned to look at me. Confusion transformed into fear on his face and then into rage. "You keep running," he told me as he produced a pocket knife from his pants. He handed me the car keys, which I nearly dropped. Then he turned around suddenly and jumped at whoever was behind us. I continued to run in fear as the sounds of a struggle grew behind me. I tripped and tumbled through the trail for what felt like hours. I didn't allow myself to stop. I almost cried when the trail ended and I walked out into the familiar car park. Not wasting a second, I ran to the car and started it up, accelerating out of that forest and onto the highway within mere seconds. I'm typing this post out at a rest stop. My phone has finally regained service, and I've called 911 to try and explain the situation. I don't think they believe my version of events, but they sent a car my way regardless. As I wait, the sun is finally starting to rise. After I hit the post button on this, I'm gonna check why the person in my backseat has been so silent the whole time.